Truth, and his name is Thomas McLeachy. Yeah, it's really great that he's here, totally cool. I'm going to give you a few words about a background of Sojourner Truth, and then I hope you enjoy it. My name is Sojourner Truth. I was born as Isabella Baumfrey, one of 13 children born to James and Isabel Baumfrey, who were slaves of Colonel Hardenberg. After the colonel's death, ownership of my family passed to his son, Charles Hardenberg. After the death of Charles in 1806, I was sold at an auction. I was about 9 years old and was included with a flock of sheep for $100 to John Neely. Until I was sold, I spoke only Dutch. I suffered many hardships at the hands of Neely, who was cruel and harsh and once beat me with a bundle of rods. In 1808, Neely sold me for $105 to Martinez Schreiber, a tavern keeper, who owned me for 18 months. He sold me in 1810 for $175 to John Dumont. Although this fourth owner was kindly disposed towards me, his wife found numerous ways to make my life difficult. Around 1815, I met and fell in love with a slave named Robert from a neighboring farm. Robert's owner forbade the relationship. He did not want his slave to have children with a slave he did not own, because he would not own the children. Robert was savagely beaten and I never saw him again. Later, he died from the injuries. In 1817, I was forced to marry an older slave named Thomas. I had 5 children. Diana was born in 1815 and was fathered by Robert. Thomas, who died shortly after birth, Peter in 1821, Elizabeth in 1825, and Sophia, born in 1826, was fathered by Thomas. The state of New York began in 1799 to legislate the abolition of slavery, although the process of emancipating New York slaves was not complete until July 4, 1827. My owner, Dumont, had promised me my freedom a year before the state emancipation if I would do well and be faithful. However, he changed his mind, claiming a hand injury had made me less productive. I was very angry. I continued working until I felt I had done enough to satisfy my sense of obligation to him by spinning 100 pounds of wool. Late in 1826, I escaped to freedom with my infant daughter, Sophia. I had to leave my other children behind because they were not legally freed in the Emancipation Order until they had served as bound servants into their 20s. I found my way to the home of Isaac and Maria van Wagner, who took me and my baby in. Isaac offered to buy my services for the remainder of the year until the emancipation took effect, with Dumont accepted for $20. I lived there until the New York State Emancipation Act was approved a year later. I learned that my son Peter, then 5 years old, had been sold illegally by Dumont to an owner in Alabama with the help of the Van Wagners. I took the issue to court, and after months of legal proceedings, I got my son back, who had been abused by his new owner. I became the first black woman to go to court against a white man and win the case. I had a life-changing religious experience during my stay with the Van Wagners and became a devout Christian. In 1829, I moved with my son Peter to New York City, where I worked as a housekeeper. In 1839, my son Peter took a job on a whaling ship. From 1840 to 1841, I received 3 letters from him. In his 3rd letter, he told me he had sent 5. When the ship returned to port in 1842, Peter was not on board, and I never heard from him again. On June 1st, 1843, I changed my name to Sojourner Truth. I left New York to make my way traveling and preaching about abolition. In 1844, I joined the Northampton Association of Education and Industry in Massachusetts. The organization supported women's rights and religious tolerance, as well as pacifism. I started dictating my memoirs to a friend, Olive Gilbert, and in 1850, William Lloyd Garrison privately published my book, The Narrative of Sojourner Truth, a Northern Slave. That same year, I purchased a home in Northampton for $300 and spoke at the first National Women's Rights Convention in Worcester, Massachusetts. In 1851, I left Northampton. In May, I attended the Ohio Women's Rights Convention in Akron, Ohio, where I delivered my famous speech, later known as Ain't I a Woman? Over the next decade, I spoke before dozens, perhaps hundreds of audiences. In 1856, I traveled to Battle Creek, Michigan, to speak to a group called the Friends of Human Progress. I sold my home in Northampton in 1857 and bought a house in Harmonia, Michigan, just west of Battle Creek. My daughter Elizabeth and her sons James and Samuel lived with me. During the Civil War, I helped recruit black troops for the Union Army. My grandson James enlisted in the 54th Massachusetts Regiment. In 1864, I was employed by the National Freedoms Relief Association in Washington, D.C., where I worked diligently to improve conditions for African Americans. In October of that year, I met with President Abraham Lincoln. In 1867, I moved from Harmonia to Battle Creek. In 1868, I traveled all over New York and Massachusetts. In 1870, I tried to secure land grants from the federal government to former slaves, but met without success. While in Washington, D.C., I had a meeting with President Ulysses S. Grant in the White House. I returned to Battle Creek in 1872 and tried to vote in the presidential election, but was turned away at the polling place. I spoke about abolitions, women's rights, prison reform, and preached to the Michigan legislature against capital punishment. Not everyone welcomed my preaching and lectures, but I had many friends and supporters among many influential people at the time.
Thank you so
I
much.
died.
We have to get going.
Yes, the last one?
Oh, okay.
You gotta let them know when she died. I died on November 26, 1883 at my home in Battle Creek, Michigan, and was buried here at Oak Hill Cemetery alongside my daughters Diana, Elizabeth, and my grandsons Samuel and William. My legacy I leave to you.
Oh.